to Dads is a podcast to help men understand and navigate the transition of being a single dude into a family man. How do we make sense of it all? Well, we probably won't be able to, but let's go ahead and have some fun trying. And we are back.
We're back.
Once again, Dudes to Dads. I'm Jason Kreidman.
I'm Alan Bush.
And this is Dudes to Dads, which I just said. So I'm repeating myself
That's
already.
All right.
It's been a long day.
Need to hear it.
It's been a long day, as we typically do. We're recording late at night.
Yeah.
And
it's getting dark.
How was your week?
Good. Yeah. It was a really good but busy week.
I feel like I haven't seen you in a whole week.
Exactly.
But we've got a great episode for you today. You know, we've been talking recently a little bit deeper topics.
Yeah.
I don't know, they seem to be resonating well with listeners. You know, we're getting some good feedback.
Well, and it's good to bring in other expert advice.
Well, as we always say, we like people that are smarter than us. Right. We talk about stuff often.
Not hard to do. But.
I know. We talk about stuff that we think we know.
Right.
I like to be an expert on everything.
Sure.
I can't be. And so we like to bring in those people that actually know what they're talking about. And today is no different. We've got Chris McDuffie. Chris is the CEO and founder of Turning Point Addiction and Recovery Services. He's also a practicing counselor at a residential treatment center. So if you haven't deduced what we're going to be talking about today,
right.
We're talking about addiction.
Yeah.
And what we're going to go into is the topics and the ideas that, you know, when guys are going through the transition of going from a dude to a dad, there's all these different things that are going on that we talk about. One of the big things that happens is addiction. Yeah. And so, you know, of all kinds, and we'll get into that. So just want to welcome Chris. How you doing? Say hello to everybody.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Chris is local here in San Diego as well.
Yeah.
And we will talk about, you know, his services and what he does. But, you know, I want to get into it. Like I had just mentioned, you know, we're really wanting to look at, you know, reasons and how or why people come and see you. Why don't you give us first a little bit of background of yourself and kind of what you do, and then, you know, who is coming to see you?
Sure.
Who are these guys?
Sure. Great question. And first, thanks for having me. It's a great show. I appreciate what you do for dads.
Excellent.
So I'm a retired high school history teacher and retired school principal and college lacrosse coach. So my background is certainly education and working with kids and parents. And I went on after a couple of graduate degrees to get a program degree at UCSD in addiction counseling. So one of the hats that I wear is a residential treatment center. I'm an addiction counselor on staff. And at a place like a residential treatment center, we get folks, usually adults in that facility, 18 and up, who are here for 30 days and work on their recovery. It can be addiction to opiates or alcohol or both, or benzos, for example. And typically they have what we call co-occurring disorders, where not only do they have a full-blown raging addiction ruining their life, but they also have things like bipolar or depression or
there's a lot of stuff going on.
Borderline personality disorder.
It's not just one thing.
Yeah. Psychology and the addiction. Itself,
And then the other hat that I wear with Turning Point is we place kids or adults in the very best treatment anywhere in the country. So we work with the family to make sure that they find the best resources
based on the
available.
situation.
Based on the situation.
And is that and you work with people all over the country?
All around the country.
Work with people and place them over the country, so
Indeed.
you kind of understand where the specialty areas are and that
Indeed.
kind of thing.
Our team does interventions. Our team finds the best possible program for them.
Okay.
We work with the family and the individual while they're placed, and we help them with aftercare discharge for the full year.
Wow. Okay. So you've got quite a lot of experience in this area.
No one could accuse you of being lazy. Jeez.
I'm also a dad.
He's got 14 jobs. That's I know how that is. So, and as I had mentioned, you know, we're this focus on the dad, you know, and the idea that the transition of when you're becoming a father or you've become a father is very, very stressful, you know, and it's one, I'm sure, of many, many stressful situations. But we often can see that, you know, people will turn to either substances or something. Is that something that is prevalent? I mean, that you see? I mean, is it, or it's coping with the current situation? You know, kind of what are the types of men or the types of parents that come and see you?
Sure, it's a great question. You know, being a dad is stressful. Wearing different hats is stressful and taxing, and the question becomes, how well are we mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, for example, in handling ourselves and the stress that we're under? So addiction, unfortunately, cuts through all races and genders and ages and socioeconomic groups, and it's a disease. It's a disease that ruins people and dads and the family. That's why we call it a family disease.
Yeah.
So, different treatment centers specialize in different nuances. One treatment center might be for teens, one treatment center might be for men only. But the folks that come to see us are people who typically are dependent. They're dependent on a drug, or they're dependent on a compulsive behavior. And unfortunately, they turn to that drug or alcohol as a solution. It's a horrible, tragic, bad solution for an underlying problem. So our hope is to help them identify, A, that it's a bad solution, but B, really, what is the problem that's driving them that they really aren't handling well? And, as dads, sometimes we rely too much on how we were raised. And we might have been raised in an addictive household. We might have been raised in an abusive household. So it's really about resiliency and even grit, if you will. That word's back in fashion now in parenting.
Rich.
So we know that the earlier a kid starts using, 10, 12, 13 years old, there's a huge correlation to future addiction rates.
Right. So I would imagine, when somebody is susceptible to that, let's say they have, I don't know if it's called an addictive personality, but they've had other addictions in the past, or they're currently going through it. I would imagine that gets exacerbated and just blows up when you're going through those kinds of stressful situations, let alone having a baby, getting married, having a baby, your life begins to change. And I would imagine that addiction flares up, if you will, at huge life changes, whether somebody else passes away, whether you have a baby, whether you are getting divorced, whatever that is. Those big life changes are those often those triggers that will, put someone over the edge. Maybe they were recovering before, and now they're going back to their quote old ways. Do you see that a lot, where there's an actual trigger that happens?
It sure can be. Usually for the addict, it starts in high school. These guys, these dads that we're talking about, are probably suffering from some level of addiction or dependency long before they get married or have that first kid.
They just never did anything with it.
Right. They might have been using up through the entire time, and it just becomes acute enough in that marriage where the damage and the destruction is so apparent. You might have a loved one now calling them on their actions.
Right.
Asking them to be more responsible.
Previously, were no responsibility. No one's holding them accountable.
Right. A couple of dudes living alone in a PB.
Drink all you want.
Yeah, exactly. In a PB beach house. Not much accountability.
Yeah. Not most supportive of your addictions.
And you talked about the acute crisis, if you will, that a dad might be facing, but we also know that people use drugs or abuse drugs just from boredom, just from isolating too much or being lonely too much and depressed too much. So the idea is to get help. The idea is to ask questions, get help, go to resources that are out there, talk to your primary physician, talk to Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, talk to your pastor, talk to your priest, talk to somebody else who might have an understanding about you and cares enough about you to say, hey, maybe you're handling this stress the wrong way.
Do most addicts know that they're an addict?
They probably don't know because for some of them, it's normalized. If they're growing up in an addictive family, it's just kind of normalized. They might even think, hey, I don't use beer or alcohol as bad as mom or dad did, so ergo, I'm not an alcoholic.
I still have a job.
I still have a job, and they think they're functioning. Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, that's a term that people kind of throw around, like I'm a functioning whatever.
Yeah.
I remember, I used to listen to Loveline, which was a popular radio show when I was growing up. Yeah. And, the definition that Dr. Drew, who's now famous, would say is, addiction is something that affects the people around you. I mean, you become, quote, an addict when, let's say you're a drinker and all of a sudden, you're not getting up for work, or so people have this tendency to say, well, I'm functional. Like I work, I take care of my kids, I'm a good husband, I'm whatever, but they might be using something, a substance or doing whatever.
Right,
you're not realizing that they, just because you're, quote, functional doesn't mean you're not an addict.
Indeed, the question becomes, what do you consider functioning? Again, if you have role models of moms or dads or older brothers or even colleagues or bosses, maybe the question is Bush League. Are you really living a Bush League level of lifestyle?
You're 50% productive.
Or worse. And it's interesting. That's something I have to point out almost on a daily basis when working with adults. Adults will talk about the plaques on their wall in their office.
Yeah. Well, that's male ego too. It's like, hey, I'm better than my dad was.
That's
right. Or I'm better than I grew up.
Accomplished way more.
Yeah, I'm an attorney, or I'm a doctor, or whatever. I mean, it's like right. You said, it crosses all lines too, the educational lines. I mean, that's what I find amazing too about something like this. It's like there's not really stereotypes. Mm-hmm. You could probably go into a treatment facility and see all different levels,
literally,
of everybody. I mean, from socioeconomic ages, ethnicities, everything. Education levels, all kinds of things. It's, what is there a tie? I mean, is there a tie to all those people? I mean, is there, there might be a couple, like you said, isolation, not having a support around you, lack of love, lack of that kind of stuff. I mean, is that maybe a thread that is common?
Yeah, I think some people have different levels of resiliency. Some people are born with a family or network or a group that they can really turn to and have quality leadership and role models in their life. But even in that group, an individual can be an addict, because remember, this is also biochemical and genetic that we're talking about.
So they make a decision to try something, and then all of a sudden they want it again,
right? Without
realizing that they're now addicted.
Right, and of course the number one epidemic in America right now is the pain pills. The pain pills, and
so that's considered the number above
number one cause of addiction,
or opiates or anything like that.
Yep, number one cause of addiction. Just recently, nationwide, driving under the impairment of pills and probably even marijuana just surpassed drunk driving.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
What kind of pills specifically?
Oxycodone, Vicodin, any of the legal medications that are highly addictive.
Yeah.
People go in for back pain and people go in for root canals, and it's a real challenge. Actually, FDA just passed that kids could have these pills now, kids under the age of 18.
For medical reasons?
For medical reasons. And these are all legalized drugs that are in your medicine cabinet. And some of them are highly addictive. And the reason is an opiate epidemic is because it's cheaper to buy the opium than it is to buy the pill on the black market. Mm. So that's why you see the pills actually turning into an opium craze.
Wow, that's startling.
Mm.
Yeah.
The idea... and
legal medication being the number
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a legal medication. I mean,
Yeah.
I've had all kinds of conversations with colleagues and family members and things about, the various types of medications that, people can have access to, and being careful about that. I recall I had surgery, I had shoulder surgery not too long ago, and I remember, and it wasn't because I was worried I was going to become addicted. I just didn't want to have it. Mm-hmm. I was just like, I don't even want to go there. I don't want to even know what the feeling is. I don't want to,
Congratulations, you're not an addict.
Yeah. No, I had a root canal.
At least not with that.
I took a half of Vicodin.
Yeah.
And only because my girlfriend at the time was like, let me just cut one in half and you just swallow it. I don't want to.
But it'd be interesting how many pills your dentist across the country or doctor across the country might have given the individual,
absolutely.
And that's what creates the propensity and the proliferation, if you will.
Yeah.
Well, why would we solve the problem when we can just take a pill to fix it?
Yeah.
That's. You said some of the work you do is the wellness and that kind of stuff, and that obviously taps into a lot of that. It's like,
right.
We don't go after the problems, and I'm sure that's what the recovery, and like you said, it's a lot of psychological stuff.
Yeah.
It's not just the physical, but you're not solving the problem. You're just taking a drug to make you feel better.
Right.
And in the end, it's like, the damage that can do. We had another guest on, Dr. Singley, who had talked about, when people are going through this process of getting married, having children, just the amount of stress that can cause. And like you mentioned, it's just, you can kind of just end up turning to stuff. Mm-hmm. And you're looking for an escape.
Yeah, and remember, we're talking about serious levels of depression or serious levels of bipolar. That's also part of this equation. This is not just somebody who, is lazy. This is not just somebody who the boss is asking for more work and and they have some kind of breakdown. These are real deal, serious psychological, mental issues that are happening.
Which happens first? Does the mental issue happen?
We don't know. Science doesn't
Chicken and
know.
egg?
Yeah, science doesn't know. That's why we talk about dual diagnosis or comorbidity, where the individual is suffering from a mental health issue as well as the addiction itself.
Okay. And so, for the audience of, let's say there's a dad out there who is not sure that they're addicted. How does an individual identify that they are an addict? That's one of the things to look at. Say, hey, I like to do this on the weekends, or I like to, once in a while I engage in this activity. How do you define it, or how is it defined? Where you say, you know what, maybe I should at least talk to somebody or reach out and at least see that I'm okay and I'm going down a good path.
Sure. The general rule of thumb is that they understand that's affecting their life and they really can't live without that drug in their system. So there is a difference between somebody who is, quote, a heavy drinker, for example, and an alcoholic, and that's something that a clinician or a doctor would have to help them understand. But generally speaking, if they find themselves not able to handle life on life's terms.
So that's not just I came home from work, gosh, I need a drink.
Right.
I mean, that's not great, but...
The issue is how many drinks are you having?
How often?
And how often are you doing it every night? And saying that... I'm not going to work out, I'm not going to run, I'm not going to pray, I'm not going to exercise, that the drink is going to become this kind of cure-all. And that if you find that over time that this is hurting your marriage, hurting your relationships with playing catch with your kid out front, making you show up late for work, then you start
You might be an addict. Remember that you might be a redneck?
Yeah, you might be an addict.
You might be an addict.
Yeah, and the good news is there's a solution. You don't have to suffer. These problems are... There's no cure for addiction. The individual we believe in the field is that you can never drink or use again properly, quote unquote. So we do not believe, most of us in the field, that there is no such thing, for example, as moderation of your drinking or moderation of your marijuana use. If you are an addict, if you're an addict, it's about going completely clean
with everything,
with all those types of mood altering drugs.
Okay.
We can talk about sugar and caffeine, cigarettes, maybe another time, but right now
everybody at the meetings goes outside and smokes.
Some do.
Yeah.
Some do.
I've seen those AA meetings and everyone's out there smoking. I'm like, you're just swapping it, man. Like, you gotta get off there.
Yeah, actually, the number one cause of death for alcoholics is lung cancer.
Isn't that great? I mean, we're laughing, but it's so serious.
It's not. I'm not haha funny. It's like haha.
Yeah, huge correlation between smoking cigarettes and alcoholics.
That's so funny, and it's a really good point because I took a psychology and I was a psych major in college.
Cool.
But, addiction is what you're really honing in on, not alcoholism or addiction to pills per se, but it's like the addiction itself. It's like you have a problem with things in general.
Yes.
And we need to solve that.
Yeah, the addict is addicted to more.
Yes.
That's the idea. The addict is addicted to more.
It's not just the substance.
Yeah, I like to approach it like that. I like to normalize it.
Yeah.
I like to make sure that the addict of whatever substance sees himself or thing or behavior, sees themselves as that community of a group of people that kind of have a lot in common, more than they might think. And again, there is a solution. There is Alcoholics Anonymous. There is Narcotics Anonymous. There are medications that can block the cravings. There are treatment centers. There are intensive outpatient programs.
But they have to want it.
They have to want it. The old colloquialism was you wait until the addict hits bottom. And the problem is people die before they hit bottom. And things like opium and heroin is not something you want to sit quietly back and watch your loved one kind of wait to see if they possibly hit bottom, because death is such a high rate of instance.
Sure.
So interventions, for example, is what allows the family with the intervention is to, quote, bring the bottom up to them. Okay. So that they don't have to, quote,
let them recognize it a little sooner.
A little sooner. Little sooner. And then prevent relapse. Philip Seymour Hoffman, for example, will never have a chance to relapse again.
Right.
So relapse and drug use has really, really serious dire consequences, and the idea is to get people well and safe as soon as possible.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, and you're talking about this, as all these things are going through my head of like all these scenarios of my children and like keeping them away from all this.
Yeah.
And
let's talk about that.
Yeah, like how, because it's so powerful.
Yeah.
And in the innocence of like trying stuff. As you become an adult or you're going through the experience of teenagers into college or whatever, of this experimentation, how do you navigate that as a parent,
Great
you know,
question.
that's it, which is a little different than what we're talking about the, you know, the dad being addict, is, you know, empowering the child to know that, hey, if you are curious, these are the consequences. I mean, how do you even I don't even know how do you approach that?
Well, here's the problem. The majority of the country has no drug and alcohol prevention curriculum in the schools. Those states that do have something in the schools is called D.A.R.E,
Right.
and we've proven nationwide that D.A.R.E is largely ineffective. So America nationwide has largely no quality, if any, drug and alcohol prevention
What was the
program.
D.A.R.E? Why was that so ineffective?
The idea was that a police officer who was well-meaning was going to go in and, in effect, move the teacher aside and kind of lecture and teach about say no to drugs, was proven to be largely ineffective, meaning that the police officer was probably not the best individual to be teaching that kind of important topic.
Got it.
Also, what we've learned is you really want the three-legged stool approach. You want a quality program that's evidence-based, and they do exist, in the school, also working with the community, and also working with the parents. And the problem largely with D.A.R.E was that it was largely working with one of those three legs.
Got it.
And there's a whole bunch of research on, you know, I love police, they're in my family, great people, but, you know, largely not a productive outcome.
Okay.
So for kids, we want to stop them as young as possible. Now, getting to a dad, if a dad is an addict, then as we're talking about being a good dad, you know, you want to get well as soon as possible so you cannot roll this onto your children.
Right.
If it is genetic, then you want to help be the last one in the family to make that genetic stop. There's research now on marijuana users. Their children are now have a greater propensity for craving heroin and becoming addicts because they are a child of a marijuana abuser. So we're talking about generations of your family being affected if you're a dad who's still using and not there to watch your kids.
And it doesn't, I mean, that's not even using in front of your kids. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the propensity because you are using, you have a tendency, you know, to do that.
Correct. So what you want to do as a dad is delay the onset of that child's first drug use as much as possible.
And how do you do that?
You do that with the education that's not in the schools. You bring that to the home. You get sober yourself and get well yourself and become a good, healthy role model for your child.
Does scaring them work?
Probably not. You know,
Well, that's the police officer approach. Is kind of circling back. To
Well,
that.
yeah, they show the accidents and they show the.
And
You know,
I feel like that, and I can almost see why that's ineffective. Not that the police officer doesn't have good meaning, and then that is consequence, but then you're only showing the consequences, not what the problem is actually there and what's causing it.
or
Because
the
people are still
alternative.
going to want to do it.
Yeah, the alternative of, I guess that's part of it is that psychology is what's the alternative? Well, if
Yeah.
you're having an issue, come talk to me.
And then,
come, you know.
well, and then some of the drugs are legal, so it's not even like. So the officer's telling me I can't do the illegal drugs. All right, so I'm going to get addicted to the things that are actually legal.
So you know what's interesting? My
Cigarettes.
kids, I have a 6-year-old boy and 7-year-old boy and 5-year-old boy. Wow, they're growing fast.
They're right in front of you.
We have talked about, the topic has come up a lot because it talks about celebrity. So one of the things, like my son, for example, loves Michael Jackson. And he's like, how did he die? You know, because we had said he died. And we talked about drugs. And he's like, well, I thought, you know, and so we started talking about, quote, good drugs and bad drugs. And it was just weird because I didn't really know how to have the conversation. I mean, I was never educated in what that means. So, but I'm trying to tell him, he's like, so if we say something and say, well, you need the drug sometimes if you had a surgery or, you know, and that, as long as it's under a doctor's care, you know, I'm trying to it's a very complicated concept that I'm trying to discuss with my son.
That's why we're here tonight.
Yeah. You know, and I'm trying to explain it and probably did okay. I would give myself maybe a C+, you know, B-. But I do think if we were continually then talking about it, because it was funny the other day, you know, somebody else came up and my son had said, you know, what happened to them? Oh, well, they died of drugs. He's like, I am never taking drugs, you know, and that was, I was like, good, you know, but that doesn't mean, you know, that's not the solution, but it was just having that open conversation about here's what it can do.
Sure.
You know, but it's your decision. Like, you know, and that's the difficult part is like how you talk about it with your child, you know, and how do you do it from an honesty standpoint? If you had tried something, you know, I have the benefit and some things of not ever being in that world,
right?
You know, so I can talk from my own heart and say, well, yes, I do drink beer, but I don't do X, Y, Z or something like that. But you also don't want to be hypocritical. I mean, even for my son to say, well, hey, I want to try beer. You know?
Yeah.
I was like, well, no.
How do we do diet crack?
I think a couple of things is, and you guys nailed it, is become educated parents so you can know what you're talking about. You know, the marijuana that's smoked today, there's different levels of THC now that was not around in the 70s in Woodstock. So, you know, the marijuana actually goes up to a level called green crack, you know, because it's just so potent. And the extraction of the THC now in liquid form, you'll hear the kids talk about butter,
vapor, and all that.
Well, it's just hash and butter, and you know, these kind of dewy products that they can put on spreads and actually digest it and eat it.
Yeah.
You know, these are real deal high levels of THC that, you know, you probably don't want your 10-year-old messing around with. So. My other rule for parents is you wouldn't let your 4-year-old run around the house with steak knives. Yeah, you wouldn't say, "Oh, I'll just let him smoke marijuana all summer long, and then I'll talk about it next year
afterwards."
Yeah. So,
but how do you do that as a parent who may smoke?
Sure.
On, you know, maybe a parent does smoke on a weekend or, you know, on special occasions or whatever. Hypocritically having that conversation.
Sure. And I'm not here championing, you know, the idea that we need to ban drugs legally or not legally. That's not the issue. The issue is health and wellness. You know, what are you exposing your kids to? How well are they sleeping at night? What is their diet? What is their nutrition? What is their exercise? I think that's all part of the equation. Yeah. And, you know, not every child gets addicted, or not every individual gets addicted to alcohol or marijuana. So that's probably not what we're really worried about tonight. What we're worried about is the propensity in that family, the propensity of that child, often when they're left alone. If divorce or parents are working too much and the child's left alone, is a good chance that they're going to be left floundering around looking for attention and some negative attention, and that could be trouble for a young mind.
Well, I had also heard too that the experimentation of drugs by young people most often happens between 3 to 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's not a Friday night party thing. It is after school when the parents are still at work. And they don't, you know, they're by themselves. They don't have anything to do. Like you said, it's boredom or it's, you know, experimentation. So that's why, you know, throw the kids in sports, put them in activities and other things. But that really does keep people out of trouble in a sense.
It can, you know, I think expectations also, you know, a child might be in a sport, but if mom and dad are pressuring the kid to be the number one quarterback in the country by age 15 and get straight A's in all their AP classes, you know, that could be a lot of pressure they're putting on that kid, who's later on going to be an adult and a dad one day. Yeah. So I think the idea is to be fair to our kids, be mindful of what we're asking our kids to do and to what level we're asking our kids to perform, and know that there's some consequences to putting too much stress or pressure on our kids. And if we're not paying attention to them, there's some dire risks out there.
Yeah, and you know, we talked briefly just about, you know, how to diagnose if you're an addict. What about seeing if your kids are addicts?
Good question.
You know, that's something else. I mean, most parents will say, well, I would know.
Yeah. That's what the pediatrician's for. That's what the doctor's visits are for. If you and be mindful of your child. If they're sleeping too late, if they're groggy in the morning, if their clothes smells like marijuana, those are
pretty easy signs.
Clear signals.
Yeah, there are different tests that they can do. Some are cheaper and through insurance. Others are more expensive, and you have to pay for cash pay. But the idea is where there's smoke, there's fire. And you know, for kids and adults and dads, the whole idea is to get well as soon as possible and make sure they realize that relying on an alcohol or drug or a substance or compulsive behavior like shopping or gambling or workaholism is probably not really going to serve them and their family well.
Well, and that touches on something very specific of how do you have that conversation. So let's take a scenario, because I think this is something that, you know, parents struggle with. You have a teenager, and they're good. You know, for all intents and purposes, they're a good kid. They do well in school. They have a lot of friends. You feel like you have a decent relationship with them. But you find something, and you find something that is alarming, you know, whether it be some paraphernalia, something, you know, or they, like you said, they sleep, they're doing something. What is the approach to not ruin the relationship, because a lot of that is based on trust. The approach, like I try to teach my kids, is like, tell the truth and you won't get in trouble, that kind of thing. And so you try to obviously do that from a very young age. Now, not saying, okay, you can't go back and fix a problem that you may have already had, but what is a kind of approach that you could take when you find something like that to be very gentle and supportive rather than, accusatory and like you're going to ruin your life? And I mean, because when you do that to especially a teenager, the last thing they're going to want to do is hang out with you and listen to you.
Yeah, great question. Again, I'm trying to separate the occasional user from the actual child who's really suffering. Right. So I'm trying to really focus tonight on the kid who's suffering. So if the child is cutting, if the child is hurting himself or herself and the parents find drugs or drug paraphernalia and there's a real acute signs of acute problems there, then you're right. The idea is love. Give them as much love and attention and care and hugs as possible. Because it means they
might not be getting it.
Because exactly, and that we're talking about a problem here where the child is probably really sick, mentally not well, not happy, really depressed, really sad, and screaming and yelling and punching walls is not really the best answer. That child needs a lot of care and support, and
but we don't often do that with addicts. We get angry. We lock them up.
Yep.
We get them in trouble.
Yep.
We do. I mean, yep. We had a brief conversation about that. It's like that doesn't seem to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Usually, what I'll do at this point of a intervention, I'll say to the family, "You wouldn't kick the guy in the head with cancer. Why are you kicking the addict in the head? Why are you yelling and screaming at them?"
So you treat it that same way.
As a clinician, we try to treat it the same way. What we want to point out to the family and the loved ones is we know you were negatively impacted by their behavior. We know that they spent a lot of money, or they cheated on you in the marriage, or they let you down, or they failed out of Stanford and you feel really bad, or they yelled and screamed while they were in a drug rage. And we know that's hurtful, and we can address that a little bit later. But please understand that person that's doing all that harm is hurting and suffering themselves.
Mitch Hedberg, a comedian who actually died of heroin overdose, but he said addiction is the only disease you can get yelled at for having.
Yes. And addiction is the only disease that tells you you don't have a disease.
Right. Yeah. Strange.
That is, that's one to think about.
Yeah, right, exactly.
It's something that we don't really handle it in that manner. I mean, that's something I think as a parent, if you get to that stage, you really do have to look at the bigger picture to say, am I spending enough time? And that's why we talk about what we do. It's about early
intervention
but involvement. So you're not even having to deal with that kind of stuff. It is we talked about having the family dinners. It's spending the quality time with the kids.
The number one way to prevent your child from becoming an addict is to have dinner together with the TV off.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Proven.
Yeah.
The number one way for an addict to stop his children, once he's in recovery, to stop his children from becoming an addict is to have dinner together every night with the TV off.
Well.
See, and that, part of that totally makes sense is because you are spending that quality time connecting.
Yeah.
That is the part, I think, and that's why I was saying about like this connection or disconnect that a majority of the people that you might encounter in your facility, they have a disconnection with other humans. They are not feeling supported around them. They might feel alone. There's not a lot of support. And the best thing I'm guessing that the people around them who love them can do is support them. Now, that probably, like I said, doesn't happen. People go like, I'm sick of this person. They've treated us with tough love, that kind of stuff. But that doesn't work. It's the same thing. You lock them up, the way that we deal with them, the way, but it's very true. When you think of it as a disease, these people really need the support.
Yeah. Well, think about why 12-step programs are so successful, and AA turns 80 years old this year. AA gives that individual a fellowship, right? A fellowship of fellows in recovery, men and women who are working together, and that might become a family. That might become a dynamic that they might not have in their life.
But they have support.
They have that support and positive role models. And, going back to separating the face of the addict and their actions for the loved ones to think about, we want the family to realize they're both suffering, the family and the addict are both suffering from the same disease. The addict is suffering when they drink it or smoke it, and you're suffering as a loved one in a very unique,
dealing with
different way by dealing with it.
Yeah.
So both family members need help. That's why there's things like Al-Anon, for the loved ones.
That's for the family members.
For the family members, or Alateen. And there are solutions to this.
Right.
There's no cure, but there's a solution.
Right.
Yeah, and that's important. I think the other thing too, I wanted to give you a chance to put out your information so that people can, if there are questions. I mean, if we have anybody that has any questions or concerns, you can always, email us at the show at podcast@dudestodads.com. But how can people get in touch with you as well?
Great, thanks. Our website is www.myturningpointbegins.com. That's myturningpointbegins.com. And on there, you'll see my email and our phone number. Our email is Chris, CHRISM, as in McDuffie, at myturningpointbegins.com.
And they don't need to be in the local area or anything, like you
nationwide.
said. Nationwide. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
nationwide. Great. And they can also join us for our private 3-day wellness retreats.
Oh.
Which are 50% wellness and 50% educational. We have some of the top minds in the country that come to a local 5-star hotel here in San Diego.
Very cool.
And they spend time with us and this famous researcher. And
so what happens at like one of these retreats, or who's going to these retreats?
Sure. These are corporate board retreats where corporate executives come together and they realize that rather than drinking margaritas all weekend at the pool, it's not very productive for the corporate bonding experience.
Shoot.
No more of that.
I was just in Las Vegas, by the way, and I saw that all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, it was 2 a.m. and I was there for a birthday, and I saw all of these people from corporate parties just going crazy.
Sure. So we get together and have a great time at a 5-star resort hotel, and folks can find more information if they email me on our website. And part of the weekend experience is diet, nutrition, exercise, yoga, meditation, wellness.
Cool.
And the other half of it is literally a lecture seminar from a very famous researcher or writer or author around a mindfulness or meditation theme. And they can do that for a minimum of 3 days with us.
And is that usually a group that comes?
Yeah, we cap it at 30 people.
Okay.
And so it could be a board retreat where a board executive or a board retreat comes together with 30 executives. Right. Or it could be 30 moms that have kids in recovery.
Got it.
Or 30 dads with wives in recovery, or whatever the 30 folks are.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We'll put the links on the page of the podcast, so we'll put the links and the contact information for anybody who needs that. Or like I said, if you have questions, just shoot us an email, podcast@dudestodads.com. Any other final thoughts of I guess resources and things to do? That's ultimately what we're here for, is the support that if somebody is going through it themselves, meaning they think that they may have some issue. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. The other is if a family member has it. Maybe their spouse might have it, or even their child. What is the first thing to do?
Sure. Well, I will give any of your listeners a free 30-minute consultation. They can call me directly and get a free consultation and get some free resources from talking to myself or somebody on our team at their website. They should, if they have problems or challenges, they should go to their local doctor, get blood tests, get workups, ask the doctor questions, go online and look for resources in their community for addiction. Intensive outpatient programs are a great way to start. They're 3 days a week for about 3 hours a day for about four weeks. Okay. And that's a daytime treatment program where kids or adults can still work and be at home and still kind of put their toe out there.
Still be productive.
And still be productive at home and still learn about their addiction.
Is that part of the addiction? I guess the recovery, not addiction process, but the still doing work, and still doing stuff that's productive?
It depends. The first thing we care about is the first 90 days in recovery, the first 30, 60, 90 days. If you think about anybody learning a new skill, if they can do it for 90 days, they'll probably get pretty good at it.
Right.
And the idea is based on the acuity, where do they need to be? Do they need to be at a residential treatment program for 30, 60, 90 days where they live 24/7 and really get to work every day and every night on that addiction and on that depression or illness? Or can they handle it with just 12-step meetings? Yeah. In the evening for 90 days.
Right.
Depends on the severity.
Severity. And also, unfortunately, depends on their pocketbook, with cash pay and with insurance situations being what it is. Unfortunately, in this country, it's often the better
pretty
care.
Expensive.
The better care can be quite expensive.
Yeah. Well, that's great. I appreciate that. Joining us, Chris McDuffie. We really appreciate it. Like I said, we'll put the contact information on the website, but just want to thank you for spending the time with us and sharing about it. And for those of you who do have an issue, or you think that you might need some assistance, get it. That's really the only thing. Don't really question it, and really, whether it's for yourself or for your children, that's why we do the show, is because we can try to become better people, better parents, and to help our kids. I mean, it's really, like you said, this is a generational thing. I mean, you're not just fixing it for yourself, but you're sort of breaking that cycle. For the people who come next. So thank you.
Anytime. Great job, guys. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
And with that, we will see you next time. Take care.
Take care, guys.